Good evening, and welcome to another fun-filled, fact-filled episode of the Blue Ribbon Podcast, brought to you by Pittsburgh Power. Um, Larry's going to turn. He's going to be a teacher tonight.
I'm always a teacher.
Well, he's really going to. He's got slides and all kinds of stuff here because we're going to talk about air conditioning. That is the subject for the evening. You know, look. I'm just going to tell you, my candy ass melts about 82, right? I'm not going without air conditioning, right? And the first time it happened to me when I bought my truck, which would have been sometime in 2013, my air conditioner quit. And I was so used to just calling somebody, and I called up the TA, and I'm like, "Hey, I've got a busted line. I need an evac and recharge." And they're like, "That'll be $1,000." And I went, "Whoa, no. Well, the line was like $60. So I start watching YouTube videos on how to recharge an air conditioner and went and spent about $75 at Harbor Freight, bought some Freon, put the line on, and I fixed my air conditioner for about $200.
Yeah, we won't talk about why that wasn't a good idea tonight, okay? So
Right. But it helped me understand the system, and that's what we're going to do tonight. Is we want you to be able to understand the system, because the amoeba that you're going to be dealing with, the single-celled organism with the patch on his arm,
and his name on the front of his shirt,
right?
And
where so he doesn't forget his name, and and so he remembers how to get to work. And look, you can say that this is unfair and it's disrespectful to talk about people. Listen, they've earned it. Okay, I'm sorry, they've earned it,
and they earn it daily, and today is no exception, as I can see in our signal text going on today.
So. And so you're just going to have to fundamentally understand that when you go into a shop, if you spend a very small amount of time on Google researching whatever issue you're having, you're probably going to be more prepared to at least understand what's wrong and what remedy is needed. You may not have the tools to do it. But
you'll certainly be more concerned with it being done right, than they are.
Right.
Because you have to understand they could care less, Now, we paint with a very broad brush here. Look, we've got some really, really good shops that we work with, and we don't mean to insinuate that everybody is this way, but unfortunately, the vast majority of them are going to fall in the category that they are not particularly concerned about resolving your problems.
It's almost everybody.
There's exceptions, I'm sure, and we have a few. And again, I don't want to make it sound like that. The problem is with 14 trucks and with the number of people who we have in contact with that, subscribe to our way of doing things, and we're friends with and whatnot. We have so many episodes every day and every week of incompetency that it makes it look like that everywhere you go, there's just no one that really knows how to fix things. And we've had some air conditioning things come up. It's been a hot summer, and we have and every driver nowadays is a candy ass. It seems like. You do know that when I grew up in the industry, air conditioning wasn't even standard equipment until the late 60s. Now, you are aware of that, right?
Oh yeah.
It wasn't.
My first car didn't have air.
It was optional to have air conditioning in a car. So,
listen, which I just want to do a real quick public service announcement. We're 4 minutes in. If you have a child, a child that is, say, between the ages of like 14 and 20, I want you to send them to this. And this is my plea. Okay. You don't understand the opportunity that sits before you if you are a young male or female between the ages of about 12 and 20, that you can go learn a trade and not be a moron and have a work ethic and make more money than you've ever dreamed of making if you will just not A, be a moron, B, have a work ethic, because every industry right now is broken. Every one of them. Healthcare is broken. Aviation is broken. Trucking is broken. Everything is upside down. We had a guy has been trying to fly here from home in Colorado for 3 days, and landed today, but his luggage did not, and they just don't care. It's we're being herded around like cattle.
Landed today wasn't exactly the good thing. He should have landed yesterday.
Right.
But
so it's just everything.
And it's everywhere. We were out to dinner the other night. I told her, I said, I am so sick and tired of what we have become accustomed to calling customer service. It's non-existent. I mean, if someone, you pick an industry. We talk about trucking all the time and how we are very service oriented, and that's the key to our success, along with being good business people. But you can, at this point in time, you could pick any industry and go into it and use our, secrets to success, that we teach. And first of all, you eliminate your competition in the first week.
Yep.
And you would have more business you could possibly handle, and it's not hard at all. It's very easy, but the problem is nobody wants to do it. And now, because of the pandemic and all the the craziness afterward, now we've got the monkey pandemic, but there's no expectation of it anymore. I mean, you drive by a restaurant and you look and see if they're even open, the dining room's even open, because now it's acceptable just to not, let's just don't open the dining room. It's so much easier for us just to work out the drive-through window. People will accept that. So let's just make that our business model. And I just drive right on by. I refuse to go in. I hope every restaurant that has a lobby closed goes out of business tomorrow. Okay. So anyway, we picked air conditioning for 2 reasons. One is it's kind of popular right now with the heat work that's going on. The other thing is it's very, very, in our experience, very, very commonly misdiagnosed and misrepaired. And I just happen to have a little background in it. I mean, one of the things that when I was in the automotive industry, I thought it would be important for me to learn about the industry as much as I could. I wasn't a mechanic. I knew how to work on stuff only because growing up as a kid in middle class America, you tore shit up and you fixed it back. We took engines out of things. We took a watch apart. We took a clock apart. If there had been a bomb there, we'd have took it apart. It's just your curiosity as a young man has you taking things apart to see how they work, and then putting them back together and seeing if there's any pieces left over. So, having a childhood where that's what you do, you just gain a little bit of mechanical knowledge by just doing things. And so I thought it'd be interesting to try to get the professional knowledge of some of these systems. And so I went on to become a certified, back then it was called NIASE, National Institute of Automotive Service Excellence. Now it's just called ASE.
I'm sure we could come up with a better acronym for ASE.
Yeah, absolutely.
A more accurate one anyway.
But anyway, I got the front of the alignment and suspension, oddly enough, and then air conditioning. And I had no idea I'd be able to use those 2 things when I was 68 years old. But anyway, it comes in handy. It freaks out a lot of guys whenever I get our drivers in a place and I'll start having them do things. And, I'm assuming that the technicians, at some point in time realize that I know what I'm talking about. When you start talking to an alignment suspension guy and you start talking about steering axis inclination, that's not something that somebody walks off the street and says, so they automatically assume that you know what you're speaking of. And so when we get into air conditioning, I start telling people how, they're starting down the wrong path and usually end up in the wrong situation. It's only because I have this knowledge. So I thought, well, why not I just take a little time tonight and let's just talk about air conditioning, refrigeration, obviously how it applies to trucks. And the thing about air conditioning is it doesn't really matter what it's in. I mean, with few modifications, The air conditioner you have in your truck is the exact same one you have in your car, the exact same one you have in your refrigerator, and the exact same one you have at home. They have a few little different things, but really the theory is exactly the same. And so let's just the science. So let's just kind of get into that theory a little bit, because it's it's all based on the second law of thermodynamics, and not going to get into a bunch of physics and PhD stuff here, but quite simply, what this means is that when a liquid changes from a liquid to a vapor state, at that point in time, the liquid absorbs heat. Think about your body. Think about when you go out and work out or get really hot. What happens is you start sweating, and sweat bead forms on the surface of your body. And as that sweat evaporates, it cools you down. Mm-hmm. That's the second law of thermodynamics. Okay. There's some more things to it there you can see on the screen, but the heat flows from the body that's a higher temperature to the body that's a lower temperature. So heat always goes to cool. Cool doesn't go to heat. And then, of course, the conducting material has a lot to do with it. Skin, I don't know how good of a conductor that is, but copper, brass, and aluminum are really, really good. So that's the reason that we use those in the system. So in a nutshell here, the refrigerant system, or your air conditioning system, simply is a system whereby there's a transfer of heat from the warm air that's that's in your truck, to the cool refrigerant that's going through the evaporator. And we're going to talk about all these different components and how this works. And then it does the opposite when it goes out to the condenser behind your radiator. We're doing just the opposite. We're going to condense that back down to a liquid, and then exchange that heat out there in that airstream, and then just do it all over again. So that's the basics of what refrigeration is. It's just these two states of change that a refrigerant goes through, going from a liquid to a vapor, and then back from a vapor to a liquid. So let's just kind of do a little overview here. This is a car, but again, like I say, it doesn't really matter. The only difference is where this has an accumulator, your truck's going to have what's called a receiver dryer. Other than that, they're pretty much the same. This is the compressor, obviously. This is the condenser. It sits out in front of the radiator and behind your grill. This is the expansion valve. This is the evaporator, and that's the receiver dryer. Now, the only difference in this system, as in the expansion valve system, this receiver dryer is actually going to be down here. It's going to be in the flow between the condenser and the expansion valve. So don't again, this is just a basic diagram of the system. So you go out there and go, oh, I see, there's my condenser. There's where it is. The evaporator is going to be in that housing on the firewall and basically reside in the floor, under the dash, above the floor of the passenger side of your cab. And then the compressor is going to be riding on the motor somewhere, being turned by a belt from the engine. So no matter what kind of vehicle it's in, it's basically going to have this configuration. So when we start looking at trying to figure out why your AC system is not working, we've kind of got to look at three major causes of that. The first one we call mechanical failures. And that's going to be things that are going to cause the system not to work besides the refrigerant system. Some examples here are obviously if the drive belt's missing or slipping. The condenser gets clogged with debris or fins are broken. These let's go back a page here, Chris. These items right here, just like radiators, they're tubes with aluminum fins to disperse heat, or just the opposite in this evaporator. It looks kind of like that, but there's fins in there. If these things get clogged up with debris, they don't work very efficiently. I don't know if you, like at home, if you'll pull your refrigerator out every once in a while and vacuum under it, it will make your refrigerator work a lot more efficiently because you're getting all the dust and dirt off of these fins that normally air would need to circulate in. So that's a mechanical problem. Um, you could think that you've got an AC problem when in fact you've got a duct or air delivery problem. That would be the ducting or the blower inside the truck. So when we have a driver that calls up and says my AC is blowing warm, well, we have to diagnose what that means. Are you getting air inside the right volume of air, and is the air warm? Or are you getting no airflow in the vehicle? Because that's going to help us eliminate whether it's a mechanical problem or a refrigerant problem. So, if you're getting good airflow in the cab, but the air is just simply warm, that tells us one thing. But if you turn your air conditioner on, you've got cold air, and all of a sudden just gradually just decreases to where you're not getting any airflow, that's probably not necessarily a refrigerant problem. It could very well be, it could be, but it's also going to be that you're not getting any blower motor through the evaporator. So that helps us decide which direction to go. The next thing is electrical failures, because this compressor is engaged through an electromagnetic clutch, and there has to be voltage there for that clutch to engage. So we have to make sure that we do have voltage to the compressor if you've got the compressor on. We've also got to make sure we've got voltage to your blower motor, because if your blower motor is not blowing, you're not going to get that air over the evaporator, and you're going to ice that up because there's no air blowing over it. So there's the three different categories that you have to figure out what you're dealing with before you can go any further. Is this mechanical? Is this electrical? Or is this in fact refrigerant?
Hey, let me jump in on that real quick, because
Sure.
I have an anecdotal story here for you. So, had a 06 Freightliner Columbia, AC was inoperable. Took it into the TA to a guy I pretty much trust, and he said, "Well, the ECM is shutting the compressor off because it says it's not reading 0 RPM from the blower motor." And I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "Well, we can't get a blower motor." And I said, "Well, okay, well, how about we take the one out of the bunk and put in the front?" He's like, "Well, I don't think that'll work." So at this point, I'm like, "Oh, well," so he's checked out. So I walk out and I get my T25 Torx bit out, and I take the blower motor from the front and I swap them, and it starts working. It's working to this day. So that told me, by process of elimination, that the ECM is reading for RPM on the front one, but not the back one, because the back one's working, but it was not giving the ECM the information that it wanted. And it was like, oh, well, the blower motor's not on, so I'm going to shut the compressor off. But that's the kind of the outside the box thing. You have to go, okay, well, these things are identical. I know they'll swap. So I just swapped them and fixed the problem.
Well, and that is an anomaly with big trucks, is that you literally have two. You have one refrigerant system. Well, you do. You've got a second evaporator and a second expansion valve and a second blower motor in the bunk.
Right.
The same compressor, the same circuitry runs everything, but there's just two of them. So that is a little more of a complicator that you don't have at home, and you don't have in your refrigerator, don't have in your car. So I do need to stand corrected there. There is one difference, and that is there's two of some things.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's not electrical and it's not a airflow problem, then it's very likely going to be a refrigerant problem. And the most common reason for poor performance is usually a loss of refrigerant. I've told the story about me taking the fresh tomatoes in the truck, and before I was through with one shift, they were turned into tomato sauce. Trucks are a very violent environment for things to work in. They vibrate. You hit bumps. You're in impossible environmental conditions, and so it's not. The reason that your refrigeration at home is much more reliable than refrigeration in your car is for that very reason. Your home doesn't move around. It doesn't run over potholes and bumps. It pretty much just sits there. unless you live in California. Then you get these tremors once in a while that shake everything up. But in your car or in your truck, they live in a very, very hostile environment for things like seals and bearings and things that that can cause issues. And so, there's just problems inherent by the environment that we ask it to work in. But here's some things that are pretty obvious. Refrigerant leaks are pretty easy to find because when refrigerant leaks, the oil that's in the refrigerant also leaks, and it usually causes an oily area around the seal or in a hose, or that oily surface will eventually attract dirt. So you've got oil and dirt as a giveaway there that you may have a leak, and that's where it might be. Obviously, there's the condenser because it's in front of the radiator. It's vulnerable to rocks and stuff. If you've got that little fine mesh wire screen that's behind your grill, if that thing goes away or you get a hole in it, you're very, very likely going to pick up a rock and put it through that evaporator. I mean, that condenser.
Or the screen will damage it itself.
Or the screen itself will. The vibration of that truck will make anything that's rubbing, and that's another common thing in trucks is refrigerant lines rubbing together, and eventually they just rub a hole in each other. The evaporator, there's obviously problems there. And so finding the leak and finding where the problem is the next challenge when you're trying to diagnose things. So you either got a mechanical problem, you got an electrical problem, or you got a refrigerant problem. So we're going to kind of eliminate the mechanical and the electrical right now and concentrate on refrigerant. That's usually what it is. Most of your amoeba are going to assume that's what it is. And so let's take it from there and go forward. This is a diagram of the refrigerant flow in your air conditioning system. And what's important about this diagram is understanding the states of what the refrigerant is during the different parts here. So let's start at the compressor because that's where it all begins. The compressor is going to compress the gas up to about 140, 150 psi. And it's going to send that vapor along this line into the top of the condenser. Now, it's very important to note that the refrigerant flows into the top of the condenser, but in the bottom of the evaporator. If you think about physics, it makes sense. If I'm going to condense a vapor into liquid, I'm going to start it up here, and the condensation is going to cause it to be liquid down here. This airflow is important, okay, because that's what gives you the airflow over those fins to aid in the change of that state from vapor, high pressure vapor, to high pressure liquid. So when this comes out of the bottom of your condenser and then goes to the dryer, we're high pressure, but now we're liquid, okay? The dryer is an important part of this. The dryer has a filter in it. In the event that some of this refrigerant doesn't condense and still stays into a liquid form, even though it might be droplets, this dryer has what's called a desiccant in it. And a desiccant, very simply, is that little bag of beads that comes with your electronics that says, please do not eat. That's what a desiccant is. And this dryer is full of that. And as long as it stays fairly young in age and doesn't get exposed to too much moisture, it will continue to absorb whatever moisture is in this high pressure liquid that's getting ready to go into your expansion valve. So that dryer does two things. It filters for debris, and it also absorbs through the desiccant any possible liquid that could be coming from this condenser that did not condense to vapor, or excuse me, vapor that did not condense to liquid. So it comes here, it goes from the dryer, it goes to your expansion valve, and that's where the magic starts. The expansion valve is going to meter this refrigerant into the evaporator at a very, very, very low pressure. It's going to drop from about 150 here to about 40 here, 20 to 40 psi here. And it's going to allow that low pressure liquid now to come into the bottom of the evaporator. This air going over it is going to now evaporate that. So it's going now from a liquid state back to a vapor state. And that change of state there is where the absorption of heat takes place. So the relatively warm air of this ambient air going through this blower, through that evaporator, there's an exchange of heat right there, and what's left on the other side is cool air. And that cool air then is blown into your cab, and you feel it as air conditioning. So that's where that comes from. The evaporation of this liquid to a vapor is what, just like the sweat off of your skin evaporating into the air cools your skin, this does the exact same thing. And then it goes back to the compressor and it starts all over again. So that's the cycle of how this works. So you've got a change of state here from liquid to vapor, and you've got the opposite here going from vapor to liquid. So that's how this thing works. So let's kind of look at these components a little one at a time. This is the heart of the thing, the compressor. It pumps refrigerant through the system. It's important to note that it will not compress a liquid. I mean, if you think about that, that's how hydraulic brakes work. You can't compress a liquid. It compresses a gas, and it takes it from about 20 to 40 psi to about 150 psi. So that's the compression that this compressor does. Now, it's important to note that this compressor is pulley driven, and that pulley has to run all the time. Even if you turn the air conditioner off, this pulley has to still keep working because it might be running other things in your truck, like the water pump or like the alternator or other items. So this can't just stop. The belt can't stop from running because it's driven by the crankshaft, and so it has to run all the time. So it freewheels until this clutch is engaged. This electrical connection right here is going to a magnet, and it's going to engage this clutch when you turn the air conditioner on, and that clutch is going to start making this compressor turn. And then when you turn the compressor off, this clutch releases and this pulley keeps just freewheeling. So we're going to come back to that. That's an important part to notice about the compressor. Okay. So Chris, here's a way to make that go away where people can read or not.
Make what go away?
Where it says slide 8. Am I the only one seeing that?
You're the only one seeing that.
Okay. So, all right. I think everybody can just see that. So let's talk about the refrigerant. People call it Freon. It's really not Freon. Freon was the DuPont company in conjunction with General Motors created a R12. Freon is actually a brand name of refrigerant 12, which we don't even use anymore. But it's so common people use it as the name of what all refrigerant is, but it's not. What we use today is tetrafluoroethylene. It's R134A. Back in about 2010, the EPA said that R12 was causing a hole in the ozone layer because of the fluorocarbons, and so it was outlawed. And so now we use R134A. R12 was dichlorodifluoromethane. This is now tetrafluoromethane. So, but the thing that's important about it is that as a refrigerant, it has to be capable of condensing, and it has to be able to carry oil with it, and it has to be able to move heat and to be safe. So the properties of a refrigerant, it has to be a chemical that can be in two states. It can be a vapor or it can be a liquid. And then it has to have the qualities that we just talked about. It's got to be able to move heat. It's also got to be able to carry a lubricant. And so that's what this chemical here is capable of doing. So R134A is probably going to be replaced in the next few years with an HFC 134A, but it should work in a similar fashion to what we're doing right now. So the refrigerant leaves the compressor as pressurized vapor and travels through the condenser at temperature around 30 degrees higher than the outdoor temperature. So, and what's important about that is the airflow through the condenser then is cooler than the refrigerant coming out of the compressor. So the condensing takes place in that environment, even though it's still hot. The outdoor, the temperature of the refrigerant coming out of the compressor is about 30 degrees higher than the ambient temperature outdoors. So you do get this condensing effect. So that's what the condenser's job is to allow that refrigerant to come through here, and then the process of going through these tubes and these venting fins condense it completely from a vapor to a liquid. The condenser does the opposite. It's going to come in here as a liquid, and it's going to evaporate. Literally, the freon literally boils at 15 point some degrees Fahrenheit. So when it reaches this area, the freon literally is boiling, and it's just turning to steam and a vapor through the process of evaporation here. And that process, the thermodynamics of that are that the cooling process takes place there. It absorbs the heat coming out of the cab and basically transfers that heat back out to the atmosphere at the condenser. So, and somebody's making a comment there about errors. Yes, the airflow through these components is critical, and we'll get to that a little bit later. I'll talk to you about that. So getting back to the thermodynamics, the change of state here, at this point, it's called the latent heat of condensation. That's the technical term for what's going on there. So the liquid refrigerant will now travel down the liquid line through the receiver dryer and into the expansion valve. So from the condenser, we're going to go through the receiver dryer, and then we're going to hit this expansion valve. So what happens there is, well, let's back up. We're going to go through the receiver dryer. I forgot. We mentioned it already. We'll go through it again. So we're going to go through the receiver dryer first. It's located in the line between the condenser and expansion valve. It's a temporary storage container for refrigerant and oil until needed, based on the demand that you're putting on the system. It's got a filter to trap debris. I mean, this compressor's got aluminum moving parts. Occasionally, like any moving parts, like your engine, it will occasionally have some little pieces of debris that'll get through there. That's caught right here. And it also has the desiccant bag to absorb any moisture or any uncondensed refrigerant. Now we're to there's another picture of it. This is like a cutaway view of the desiccant, the dryer. To making a big deal out of this, because this is a very commonly overlooked item by the technicians. They'll do a repair and they won't replace this. And the problem with that is this desiccant has a capacity. If it can only absorb so much moisture, it's like a sponge. And once it gets full, it can't absorb anymore. Well, when you have your system open to atmospheric pressure because you have run out of freon and the system is no longer pressurized, or you've had a catastrophic failure and you've got a hole in a condenser or a hole in a hose, and now you've got atmospheric pressure inside the system, it doesn't take long for the humidity in the atmosphere to fully absorb all the capacity that this desiccant has to give. So it's no longer effective. And once it absorbs all it can absorb, it can't absorb anything more. So changing this to get the desiccant back in it in a new condition is critical when you're replacing components or if the system has been open to atmospheric pressure for an extended period of time. So Another thing you might want to notice here, well, I can't tell if you can see if you can, I'll get to that a little bit later. But this is a very important part of the system. And if it's not changed when you put a condenser on or a compressor on, or you've got a leak that's been leaking for a long time and you've lost all your freon, you've lost your capability to absorb moisture. And what happens there is if you don't absorb the moisture, um, um, the moisture and the freon actually form a very acidic. Well, it forms an acid. It will actually eat away at the part of the metal parts of the system. It actually forms hydrochloric acid, for a refrigerant and water. So not a good thing to happen. And by not changing this, you're just setting yourself up for another problem relatively short, in relative short order. So now we're to the expansion valve. So the liquid refrigerant now goes to the metering device. The outlet of this device begins the low pressure property of the refrigerant circuit. At this point, the refrigerant will begin to boil and evaporate at a low pressure temperature about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So there's a capillary tube on the outside of this, which regulates at which point it regulates how much this little metering valve allows into the evaporator. So it's metered and it's controlled by temperature. So this is a little tiny valve, and it's up to this point we've got high pressure liquid. And as soon as it comes to that valve, we now have low pressure liquid coming out of there. And we've gone from about 150, 160 PSI to now probably 20 to 40 PSI. And we'll get into those numbers when we start talking about the gauges and whatnot. So here's sort of a diagram of the condenser, or excuse me, the evaporator, and how it works. It's basically a heat exchanger. It contains a core where low pressure, low temperature liquid enters. The blower in your vehicle blows air over this evaporator, and the heat transfers from the cabin air into the liquid refrigerant, boiling it into a gaseous state. The cooled cabin air is circulated back into the cabin. The refrigerator or the refrigerant either directly enters the compressor well, we don't have an accumulator orifice in a truck system. That's in a car system. Expansion valve systems are what's in trucks. So they both do the same thing. So don't let that trip you up. So, but the important part here, we've got liquid refrigerant here. We have vapor refrigerant coming out. Now, keep in mind, the compressor cannot compress and cannot deal with liquids. So it's important that we have this back to a vapor, because as it leaves here, it's going right back to the compressor. So the boiling refrigerant absorbs the heat energy from the air flowing over the evaporator. The refrigerant will totally evaporate because the heat energy absorbed will transfer the refrigerant from a liquid state to a vapor. And so here we are. We're going right back there as a low pressure vapor back to the compressor, and we start the process all over again. So at that point in time, it's called the latent heat of evaporation. That's the two different state changes of state that we talked about with the thermodynamics. So that's how the system works. It's just an exchange of air of heat here and heat here, and that's really all there is to it. So at this point in time, you have cool air flowing out of the evaporator. Refrigerant is carrying the heat absorbed from that air back to the compressor as a low pressure vapor. Here's another little chart that kind of gives you the status of the refrigerant in the different stages, what form it takes. It's kind of important that you understand that, because as you start a lot of diagnosing the air conditioning systems is feeling the lines, because the lines are supposed to feel a certain way. These lines that are red should be warm to the touch. These lines that are blue should be cool to the touch. So if not, you've probably got a restriction somewhere, or you've got a refrigerant deficit, or could have too much. Both of them are a problem. Keep in mind the compressor cannot pump liquids, only vapors. So another chart. Makes sense so far, Chris?
Yes, sir.
We talked about the clutch. So a lot of times we're talking to our drivers and we say, is the compressor running? And they look outside and this pulley is running. And they go, yeah, the compressor's running. But unless this plate right here is spinning with this pulley, the compressor is not running. Okay, this pulley is going to run continuously as long as the motor is running and the fan belt's on it. But if this is the magnet that magnetizes the pulley, that makes that clutch ride against this surface right here, and makes that then in turn the inside workings of the compressor. If this is not turning, the compressor is not working. So I want to make sure you understand this, because if somebody's asking you, is your compressor turning, unless this is actually turning, it is not. Now, it could be for various reasons. Okay. First of all, you got to have voltage here. Or either way, you're going to have to complete a circuit here. It could be voltage here, or this could be a ground, depending on the way the system's built. Either way, though, it should light a test light. Okay. If it does not, this is not being electrified, and therefore this is not being magnetized, and therefore that clutch is not engaged. So that could be a problem. There could be a problem with low pressure in the system. So the low pressure sensor is shutting the power off to this. So it may not be an electrical control problem. It could be intentionally being disconnected because we have low pressure in the system. And averse to that, if the system's building up too much pressure for whatever reason, it has a high pressure sensor, which will also cut this power to this electromagnet and turn to save the compressor. Is relatively expensive part. It's not the most expensive part. The evaporator probably is, and it's certainly more labor to change it. But the compressor is protected by these two circuits. So if there's a problem with the pressure in the system, it's going to disengage this clutch to save the compressor. So let's pause here a second, Chris, to answer some questions. Okay.
Okay. Which one are you going first?
Well, I don't know. Pete's just repeating some thermodynamics. They all appear to be correct. So we'll and he's right. Heat always goes towards cold. That's one of the laws of thermodynamics. What do we got here? Not only will they not replace the receiver dryer, they will leave the system open for 2 days. Here's something else. I'll bring this up a little later, but here's something else. If that was, you know how mechanics will take parts back, or if that receiver dryer comes to you, and when it comes from the factory, it has these plastic caps screwed into the fittings where the lines go on purpose. Because if that desiccant is exposed to air, it's no good after just a couple of hours. Mm-hmm. So if someone takes those caps off, doesn't use that dryer, and puts it back on a shelf, they might as well throw it away. It's completely worthless. So you can't let a mechanic put a dryer on your system where those caps have been. All air conditioning parts come with, even if you buy a hose, it's got caps on it to keep moisture out of that system, out of that component. Because you got to get that out, and we'll go through the process of getting that out. But moisture is your enemy in refrigerant. So, but you're right. That was kind of a funny thing, but you're right. I just tuned in. If air blows cold 15 degrees at the vent, well, number one, it's not going to blow 15 degrees at the vent. It's only going to blow about 40 degrees less than ambient temperature outside to a point. And I'll show you a chart when we get done. But
about the lowest I've ever seen is 40 to 50.
40 to 45 is about the lowest. But it could be as high.
Or that could be autocorrect, and maybe he's saying 50 degrees at the vent. But
yeah. But anyway, at idle but warms up driving. What are your thoughts on that? I can tell you my thoughts on that. You're freezing up at the evaporator. Now, there's different reasons it could do that, but you're freezing up at the evaporator. So either we're not getting airflow out of the evaporator, or we've got a low or too high refrigerant situation, and we're freezing up the evaporator.
One of our trucks, I don't remember which one it was, had a bad, let me think of the term for it. There's a sensor inside the air box. And I guess it was a evaporator temperature sensor, and it was giving a false reading, and it was causing the system to freeze up because it was not shutting the compressor off, and it just kept going and going and going. And so then it would, inside that box, would get so incredibly cold because it kept pumping. Then ice would form on the evaporator, which would cut the airflow down. And then the minute you turn the air conditioner off, then 4 gallons of water would pour out of the bottom as the hot air came and melted the ice. And so we had to change that evaporator temperature sensor, and then it was fine. But you always have to be thinking about, what's it doing? If you're driving down the road and all of a sudden the airflow goes away, but it's still cold, you just don't have airflow, then something's restricting your airflow. Well, it's cold and your airflow is restricted, so you're probably froze up.
It's cold there at the evaporator, but eventually that air is going to get warm as it comes through there, because as the cab warms up, the air on this side of that evaporator is going to start getting warm. The other thing it could very well be is an expansion valve, because the expansion valve is metered for temperature. So if it's not reading temperature correctly and it's letting too much refrigerant pass through, it'll freeze the evaporator up as well. So there's a multitude of things it could be, but usually the common denominator there is an evaporator that's freezing up. That's very, very likely what I would suspect it would be. So, all right, well, let's move on. If you guys have any questions or comments, just stick them in there, okay? These are my observations, okay? Things you rarely see. When I'm in shops, or when I'm, around shops, and I notice people working on air conditioners. I hardly ever see anybody clean a condenser or an evaporator. Both can be done. The evaporator is a little harder, but it can be done. There's a chemical cleaning that you can do there. Condenser is not that hard at all. Matter of fact, you could do it when you wash your truck. And you got to be careful with high pressure washers, but you can blow out the debris and the bugs and the dust in your condenser. For this system to work properly, airflow is important. So I think Pete said air is king. Airflow is critical. So if you've got obstructions in these cooling fins where air is supposed to be getting there, and you've got dust caked up in there, it's not going to work right. And I can tell you right now, the amoeba are not going to catch that. Okay, they're not going to look for that. I used to when I used to go through the truck washes, I would actually talk to the guys and have them spray backwards through the radiator into the grill and try to blow backwards to blow stuff out the front of the radiator and the condensing coils and so forth. The other thing I never see, anytime I worked on air conditioners, I always had a box fan I set in front of the grill. Because if you don't have airflow going the condenser, it's not going to give you the proper readings. And I've never, ever seen a truck technician do that. So how are you going to diagnose a problem with gauges if you don't have air going through the condenser, okay, and you're not condensing? Those gauge readings cannot be accurate without airflow. And there's no airflow sitting in your shop. It's designed to have air flowing through that. And you'll never find anybody doing this, but how hard is it to put a fan out front? I never see anybody measuring outlet temperature in the middle of the dash.
Let me tell you one that Carl did. We had a truck where the air conditioner was working. It just was not working. It was that black truck, hottest thing I've ever drove in my life. But I'm like, dude, this air conditioner's not working right. So he measures it at the vent, and he's like, man, it's 10 degrees. But everything else checked out. Did evac and recharge. Pressures were where they should be, right? So he took a big piece of cardboard and cut it, and he blocked the condenser. And what he was able to figure out was that the fan clutch was just weak enough that it was not completely stopping and you couldn't really tell it, but because you want to think that your fan clutch for your engine fan is binary, it's on or off, but it's not really. And so that fan was dragging, and with it dragging, it was creating enough airflow that the system could not get cold enough, and the condensing wasn't going good enough. And so that's how he was able to figure it. He completely blocked the airflow, thinking that, well, the system now got any air, it should react a certain way. Well, it didn't react, and that's how he figured out that the fan was the actual problem.
Right. We just talked about this, verifying that new receiver drivers come in unopened, capped condition. If they're not, they're worthless. You might as well just throw it away. You're not. And what happens? This just kicks the can down the road. You leave there thinking the air conditioner's fixed, and a couple of weeks or a month or two later, you come back and you've got icing up problems. Because if any moisture is in that system, it's going to cause a blockage in the evaporator, because that's where it's the coldest, and it's going to freeze that up and freeze up your evaporator. And all was caused was by the desiccant not taking the moisture out of the system, because the desiccant wasn't replaced, or is replaced with one that's already fully absorbed. Here's a big one. Okay. Adding refrigerant oil after repairing leaks or changing components. The refrigeration system also is the carrier for the lubrication system. The only thing that needs lubricating in the refrigerating system is a compressor, but it has moving aluminum parts. And so it can't have a sump because everything flows through it under pressure. So the lubrication has to be embedded in the Freon, and it's a special refrigerant. It's even more special with R134A. And so if you have a catastrophic failure where you release all of your refrigeration to the atmosphere at one time, you're also releasing the majority of your oil. The oil typically resides in the bottom of either the compressor, the evaporator, or the condenser, or the dryer. That's where it's going to sit there and accumulate. And if you replace any of those four items, you're losing the oil that was in it, and it has to be replenished. I spent about 2 hours a day because when I did refrigeration, we didn't have charging stations. I had gauges and a vacuum pump and a 30-pound drum of Freon, and it was scale. So I could manually do everything. Well, now this is all done through this machine that does the thinking for you. It's kind of like the GPS of air conditioner repairs. Okay. So you're supposed to dump this oil reservoir out before each use, which I'm sure that doesn't happen. And this oil reservoir will catch the oil that comes out of the recovery, if you're recovering, and let you know how much you lost. Now, you can't use that oil back, but it tells you how much oil you should replenish. Not one of the systems that I could find today will do that replenishment for you. It has to be done manually with a bottle of oil and a tube with the vacuum side of the system. And every time we've had a truck worked on, I've asked every one of our drivers, did they put oil back in? Oh, it's done automatically. Well, no, it's not. You can't prove to me that's been done. And so now you put a new compressor on with not the correct amount of oil, and you look up in a few months, you put another compressor on, you go, damn, that compressor's a piece of shit, when all we didn't do was we just put it on there and didn't put any lubricant back in the system. So adding refrigerant oil after major leaks or changing components is a must. It has to happen. Yet that automatic GPS that they're going to use will not do that. I looked at Robinair today. I looked at Snap-on. I looked at the major brands of charging systems. I couldn't find one of them that had any provision for putting oil back in the system. So I think that's a huge problem.
All the ones that I've seen, it says, do you want to add oil? And you have to say yes. And if not, it's not going to add any oil unless you tell it to.
Well, the oil that comes out of it is supposed to be discarded, and you're supposed to put new oil in its place. That it catches the oil to give you an idea of how much you lost. And that's not the source of the oil. So, but probably gives you an opportunity to do it during the vacuum.
Well, like the ones they use at TA, I'm not sure what brand it is, but it has a little oil tank on it, and it says, "Do you want to add oil?" And if you say, if you don't say yes, it won't put any oil in it. It just puts in refrigerant. But
Does it?
I saw that the other night at Chris's. I saw it at the one at TA. Billy's got a snap-on one, and they'll all say, "Do you want to put oil in?" Yes. Then you hit the button, and it'll add the oil. But if you don't tell it to, it won't do it automatically. So
Yeah.
it did it automatically. No, it doesn't. It only does it if you manually tell it to.
Does it let you specify how much oil to add?
I believe so. I'm 90% sure that it says how much do you want to put.
Okay.
Like
All
2
right.
ounces.
Okay.
Or
Well,
4 ounces.
that's good. I couldn't find that today, but I did have time to look more than about an hour or two. So the other thing that we see quite often is not a thorough enough evacuation. Now you're going to do this a couple ways. You're going to maybe pull a vacuum real quickly to do a leak test. That's not the same thing I'm talking about. Once you have all the repairs made and you've got the system back together again, the evacuation on that system has to be at least 30 minutes after you attain 28 inches of vacuum in housing. Otherwise, you're not going to get all the moisture out of that system. So, and the longer the better. Too much. There's no such thing as too much of an evacuation. But if you do it for less than that, it's not a quality repair. It's
Right,
not
because the vacuum will basically boils the water out.
correctly. You're lowering the atmospheric pressure, so the water will boil out. That's exactly right. So, but that's another thing that I regularly see is that people actually do a quality evacuation. Another thing is it's not getting down to 28 inches. You haven't got the leak fixed. Okay.
Right.
If you can't get there, you don't have the leak fixed.
And that's why a lot of them don't want to do it, because if you do a 30-minute vacuum and then a 30-minute leak test, well, that's an hour that you're doing nothing, and they don't want to spend that amount of time. Oh, I'll just vacuum it down for 5 minutes and then we'll leave it for 15 to make sure it's not leaking. All right, you're good to go. No, vacuum it for 30 minutes. That way you're for sure, if you want to do a quality job. Now, if you don't want to do a quality job, keep doing the crap that you've been doing. But every time I've done it manually, without a machine, because I don't have a machine, I vacuum it for 30 minutes and then I set it for 30 minutes. And if I don't lose any vacuum in that 30 minutes, I know I'm good.
Exactly. Exactly. It will not hold a vacuum if you've got a leak, even if it passes a leak test. And I think these systems use nitrogen for the leak test, but if it won't hold a vacuum, if it won't hold 20 inches of vacuum for, like you say, 15 minutes, you do not have the problem is not resolved. So again, you're kicking the can down the road. Common mistakes I find by techs: number one, not having any idea how much refrigerant is the system. The only way you can do this is you got to hang a set of gauges on it or hook it up to your machine that's got the gauges in it. That's the first. Once you determine that it's not mechanical or electrical, the very first thing you should do before you do anything in a refrigerant system is hang a set of gauges on it. Because if you don't know what the low pressure is and the high pressure is, if they're not in line with what they should be, you have no idea what the problem is. And so by not knowing how much refrigerant is, then just adding Freon to it and overcharging the system is the second most common mistake. These systems are designed to hold a specific amount of refrigerant. Freightliners are like 3.75 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's more than that, you're not going to have optimum performance by this system. That's where you get the evaporator freezing up. Okay. We've already talked about the dryer. Here's another one. They'll put components on. Every one of these components has an O-ring where it connects to a hose. Every single one of them. Yet, how many times do you see somebody get refrigerant oil out and coat that O-ring with oil before they torque it down and split, crack? I mean, or not even torque it down. We've had that problem too. It's just like when you change oil in your truck and you take your finger and you put a little bit of oil around the oil filter gasket to keep it from kinking when you torque it down. It's no different. You've got O-rings going against aluminum, and when you torque that down, if you don't have some lubricant on there, you're very likely going to twist, slice, crimp, something that's going to give you a problem with that connection right there. And with this system at 150, 160 psi, it doesn't take much of a problem with a seal to have a leak. And you've got the vibration of the truck going down the road and all this other stuff. So next thing we see a lot is not securing hoses and lines from rubbing. They'll put on a brand new $300 line and just leave it. And you look up and it's rubbing against the hood. It's rubbing against the radiator support. It's not properly secured, rubbing against another hose. Not checking continuity in the high and low pressure sensors. It's how hard is it to ohm out a low pressure or a high pressure sensor to see if that's the problem before you replace a $400 compressor. And then just not using linear systematic diagnostic testing. Jumping from one thing to another. I mean, just the other day we went from having a problem, an AC problem. We jumped to compressor. It was the automatic thing. That may or may not be the case. There's lots of steps in between. Air conditioner's not working and needing a compressor. We had one the other day where we needed a condenser based on the technician's observation of the condition of the condenser, yet it didn't leak and it held pressure. So just not proper diagnostic procedures is very common when you're dealing with guys that aren't trained. Here's one I read about. A guy seriously asked, is 5 ounces half a pound? So now this is who's working on your air conditioner, okay? So that's an example of what I'm talking about. This has to do with the oil level in the system. Anytime that you replace a major component, you need to make sure you've got the right amount of oil in the system, and it resides in the bottom of the evaporator, the bottom of the condenser, the bottom of the dryer, and the bottom of the compressor. Well, how many people would replace those? And if you're not adding oil when you do that, you're just asking for trouble. There are oil capacity charts that they have the access to that should tell them exactly how much oil is in that system. So, yes, Pete, it's called PAG oil. That's the oil you use with R134A. Pete must be a thermodynamics professor or something. Here's a little diagnostic chart to kind of help you with a start. If when you get your gauges on there, and you've got, your low side should be somewhere between 20 and 40 psi. Your high side should be somewhere around 150 psi. If that's not what they are, here's some things to look for. Now, we don't have orifice tubes in trucks, so forget about that. Same thing in the expansion valve. But these are some basic things to look for diagnostic wise when your pressures are not lining up correctly. We had one the other day where they hooked the vacuum to it, and it got to 28 inches before the guy got turned around. Well, the problem with that was there was a constriction, and it was reading the vacuum.
It was a bad machine.
Oh, it's a bad machine. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We found that out later.
All right. Well, anyway, if you have these conditions in your low side and high side, and it's not normal, these are some things to look for. Not everything, but these are a good place to start. Okay. Places to check for leaks. Okay. Anywhere there is a connection. Okay. Condensers, really, really bad about picking up a stone or vibrating a weld loose. Okay. Evaporators, the same problem. They sit inside this cabinet and they sit in there and vibrate. Another problem with evaporators is dirt. The cabin air filter, somebody takes it out and throws it away. I'll show you a picture of what that looks like here in a second. But anytime you have fittings, you have a potential for a leak. So those are places to look. And what you're looking for, you're going to be looking for, number one, for oily residue around these fittings. and it attracting dirt. That's the giveaway. So the hardest one to see is this compressor shaft seal, because the clutch covers it up pretty good. So rest of them are pretty easy to find. Here's some general guidelines for correlation between ambient temperature and vent temperature. Also should give you some pressures, because all this is based on ambient temperature. The system will not act the same at 60 degrees outside as it does at 100, as you can well see here. At let's just look at 70 degrees. At 70 degrees, the low side pressure should be between 30 and 40. High side should be 190 to 220, and that center vent temperature with the blower on full speed and the air conditioner on max should be 46. So as a general rule, the AC system properly working should be about 40 degrees difference than the outside temperature. At max, it could be less. As you can see here, at 100 degrees, it's only going to be 56. So that's a 44 degree drop. But at 60, it's only going to be 45. It's a 15 degree drop. So it's all relative to the ambient temperature outside. So if you're not getting these pressure readings at these temperatures, you've probably got a problem with the charge. Okay. That's what an evaporator looks like if you don't keep the cabin air filter clean, or you pull it out and run it without it. That's what a cabin air filter will look like if you take it out and it hadn't been changed in a year. We also have filters inside the truck around the blower motor area. There's a couple of different filters in there that can also look this way if they haven't been changed since you own the truck. Air, what Pete say? Air is king. Airflow is king. This evaporator will not work. Okay? There's no way that evaporation is going to take place with airflow being restricted like that. And all the refrigerant you put in it will not change this.
So, you know, I'm when I had my truck, I made 3 different AC repairs on my own without using a machine. I bought a set of manifold gauges at Harbor Freight. They were $65. They're $65 right now. I think they were $50 then. And they sell an air operated vacuum pump. It's $16. And if you have one of those lines that you can hook up to your Glad hand, that's what I used. You plug up the air line, you release the red knob to get the air pressure, and this thing would pull 28 inches for 30 minutes. And then I close the manifold gauges, which I have. There's a picture of them, and held it to check for the leak. I replaced the compressor, I replaced the condenser, and I replaced the bad line. This is really not rocket science; it's science. And just like that, didn't you have this pressure chart? Well, you can look at those gauges. And the blue is the low side and the red is the high side. So you can look at that and see, what the pressures are, and then you can make the determination. But every time that I replaced a component, I replaced a dryer. And I learned all this on YouTube. Now we had a situation, Rocky alluded to it earlier, where the driver had a bad line. He went and replaced the line, went to the TA in Nashville, which don't ever go there for anything. And they're like, well, we're busy, but we've got a guy that we know that'll come out and do it. And because he didn't have any of the tools to do, he didn't have manifold gauges, he didn't have vacuum pump. And so a guy shows up about midnight and basically does a horrible job and tried to charge us $1,300. That didn't work. And it still didn't work, and I think I've told that story on the podcast before. But this is not something so complicated that you can't understand at least the basics. And that way, when somebody's full of shit or not. That's the key. That's the whole point of this episode, is that so you are better prepared to walk in and say, well, here's what I have found. I need a line replaced. Here's my line and here's my dryer. When we went, we had a bad compressor, for sure. And then we went to a shop that we know here locally. Well, it turns out his machine was bad. We thought we had a restriction. And so the driver kept on going, ended up and I said, well, because we thought we had this restriction, I said, well, pick up 2 expansion valves and a dryer. Went to the shop. Of course, they didn't listen, which I'm kind of glad. And they just did an evac and recharge. I'm like, oh, it's fine. Okay. Did you put the dryer on? Well, no. We'll put the dryer on. Well, he says it don't need a dryer. I don't give it. Just do what I tell you to do. I'm paying the bill. Why is that so hard? Change the damn dryer. Because we didn't have a dryer when we put the compressor on that night. But you can go get the parts and pieces that you need if you can walk logically, linearly through that process and say, okay, well, I'm pretty sure I know what the problem is. And at least you'll know if one of these morons is selling you a bill of goods where you can say, no, that's not what we're going to do. I want you to do this rather than that,
The problem with the dryer is that you can't see inside of it. And so if a technician doesn't understand what that dryer does and what it's made out of, he doesn't understand the need to replace it. It just looks like a tank. It's not leaking. It doesn't look bad. Why does it need to be replaced? It's kind of like the vibration damper, or the that's not what we call it. Yeah, vibration damper on the front of a crankshaft. It doesn't look bad. It looks perfectly fine, but that's because you don't understand what's inside of it, and that the silicone inside of it turns hard after 500,000 miles, and it's useless. The same thing. This has a life expectancy of whatever it is, but once it's exposed to the atmosphere, that life expectancy is very, very, very short. And again, to someone who doesn't understand air conditioning, they don't understand why that needs. We shouldn't be having to explain to an air conditioning technician that we want the dryer changed. But yet every time we get an air conditioner worked on, we have to make sure that they add that to the work order, because it's not something that they recommend, right?
Right. Well, and so here's something that I learned by accident, and with something we were able to do the other night. Trying to think how I can do it like this. On these sanding compressors that pretty much all of these trucks have, you can window. There we go. So this is the sanding compressor. Okay. Well, Chris had some compressors on the shelf, but they didn't have the same connections. Well, on these sanding compressors, you can change the back housing, because the basics of the compressor itself are the same. And so we were able to take one of the ones that he had on the shelf, take the back off of it, and swap it over so that we could make the connections. And I looked up and found the torque specs, and so we torqued it down to what it was supposed to be. So, now I would, I almost would, if I was an owner operator, I would, because you can buy one of these things for what, $180, $200. I probably would have one in the truck with me. It's just, when you can have the part there, is it really necessary to carry every piece of your, you don't have enough room to carry every spare part that you could have. But at least now, if somebody's got a sanding compressor, you can make it fit your truck, period. So at least you open up the opportunities, because you might be able to buy it at a Peterbilt dealer or vice versa, depending on what kind of truck you have. you know, and it's just stuff like that. We've learned all this stuff accidentally along the way. It's just, stuff you learn from experience.
Well, desire. I mean, how many times have we gotten a part within an hour of it being on national backorder for 52 weeks?
Oh yeah.
Part of this is
What was
just
the last one?
I don't remember. It happens so often. I don't
Yeah,
remember.
but it was a week or so ago on national back order, and I called Rick about Tom Neal, and I literally had one.
Shh. Don't tell our secrets.
But I had one the next day. He's like, "Oh yeah, well right here's one." It was that steering shaft. It was that steering. So here's the kicker. Okay, I called Freightliner dealer A. Hey, I need this steering shaft for this truck. Oh, yep, national back order. Okay. So I called Freightliner dealer B. And he goes, well, I don't have one, but here's the list of dealers that do have one. Now, Freightliner dealer A could have looked at that same page in the computer, but Freightliner dealer B looked at it and said, well, here's the people that say they have it. Now, obviously, they're not going to sell it to the other Freightliner dealer, right? So he told me where it was. I called. The guy said, yeah, right here it is. I said, well, send it to me. And it was here 3 days later. It's just, but it's laziness. It all comes down to laziness.
Well, the other problem is you have no guarantee that they've looked the part number up correct. How many times have we
Right.
found the part and it wasn't even the right part number? It's just it's a lack of professionalism. It's a lack of we had one of our drivers do a Facebook post today. He was complaining about a TA Petro, believe it or not, and he was belly aching to the Facebook world about why is it that these TA Petros, he was trying to get them to go ahead and get the parts on hand, so when he gets there tomorrow, whatever, to get the work done, the parts will be there. He even offered to pay for the parts up front. They wouldn't do it until he showed up, and he's so pissed off about their lack of customer service. I said, Richie, why? This is really, really easy. They don't give a shit about you.
Nope.
Quit wondering about this, okay? They could, the problem with the repair industry and trucking is that towing is too expensive. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You get, if you're a shop and you're located along the interstate somewhere and there's 1,000, 2,000 trucks that drive by that interstate exit every day, there's just the law of averages are going to work out in your favor, that there's going to be enough trucks break down nearest that exit to a tow truck to come to you, that you're going to do all the business that you can handle just because of where you're located. They could never come there again and you still stay in business because you'll have another 1,000 trucks come by tomorrow. And after that, and after that, and after that. It's not like you chose where you're getting the truck worked on. You get it worked on the closest place that you broke down because it cost $1,000 an hour to tow the damn thing. So you're not going to go any further than where you have to go. And that's the reason that they can act this way. They don't have to have customer service. They don't need it. The demand is there,
And Chris's comment goes back to my public service announcement in the beginning. New guys in parts are not interested in learning, and the older guys that know what they're doing are retiring. It's going to get worse. Well, there lies the opportunity. If you're young and you're not brain damaged, and you have a little bit of work ethic, you can go in and you can learn these things and you can turn this thing around. I preach it at my kids all the time. I point out the amoebas. I'm like, well, look at this one right here. Hopefully that they're the generation that can turn this stuff around.
My first full-time job after college was a parts manager. That's where I started. Now look.
Peter says maybe the right business to be is in towing. Well, yeah, hell yeah. In the last 10 years, absolutely. Because these new trucks are, think about, can we just stop for a second and think about living in 2022? George Jetson was born last week. You know, July 31st, 2022 was supposed to be George Jetson's birthday. And we have created an environment where OEMs are putting out junk. You know, I've got a 2017 Ram 1500 that I love. I love my truck, but I want rid of it because I feel like it's a ticking time bomb. There's just some processor, you know, good God, give me a 1986 square body, you know, you can fix with a Phillips head screwdriver and a crescent wrench. You know, it's just, we're putting out junk. And that's why you couldn't give me a new truck. If you gave me a new truck, I'd sell it and go buy 5 lunatic trucks. It's just, it's insane that we've, you know, and I guess Kia, I've been seeing this on Twitter. I guess Kia's having some big time engine troubles. Brand new cars, just blowing motors left and right. And some kid that was I must have been in his 20s, got a TikTok account. And he walked through the dealership and he's like, well, there's a motor, there's a motor, there's a motor, there's a motor, and there's a motor. And here's another. And he pointed out like 16 or 18 new engines in crates for new Kias. Yeah. Corporate got a hold of him. He don't have a job anymore.
Well, getting back to this, we're not trying to make you into AC techs. That's not the point of this. The point of this is to prepare you enough so that you know the difference between you being in a rainstorm or somebody pissing on your shoe. That's really all we're trying to do here, is so you understand that if you go in there and they start down the wrong path, you can go, wait a minute, you know, and after all, it is your truck, and you do have every right to dictate how they're going to work on your truck, or you can tell them to listen, button it up and I'm going elsewhere. We've done that many times, or threaten to do it. And usually the threat of doing it is all it takes, you know? You know, just trying to save you from having to spend thousands of dollars to fix the same job 2 and 3 and 4 times. It's funny what, Chris said something about EGR next weekend, but that's the other one. You know, nobody can fix them. You know, everybody just kicks the can down the road and let the next guy deal with it, you know?
Well, but that is one encouraging thing with, what's his name? Chase at DPF Alternatives.
Yeah.
They
can fix them. Yeah.
They are actually fixing them now. You know, we can run the catalyst, we can do the diesel force cleaning, we can do the DPF Alternatives. You know,
and get this, if he does the cleaning and you run the catalyst, it's a lifetime warranty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's strong.
Well, there was a Landstar driver broke down here a couple of weeks ago. I think he ended up at Chris's shop. And I talked to him and just, you know, the typical, well, I went to the dealer and it still don't work. And so I called Chase. And he was like, oh, well, you know, you got to look for this, and these welds will break. And if you see this and you see that, because the market has finally provided us an opportunity. The government sure as hell hasn't done it. The OEMs haven't done it, but the market has provided this opportunity now where we have people knowledgeable enough about how the system works, just like this AC thing. They understand EGR, SCR, DPF. They understand the pressures and they understand the components and they know what to look for, and then they can go, oh, well, you know, you got a broken weld here, you got a leak here, this is a clamp. It's not, well, you just need a $13,000 one box. We need to just fix it. But the OEMs, they have no clue how to fix it. And of course, they don't care. They want to sell you a $20,000 one box.
Or a new truck.
Yeah.
So, well, hopefully you'll understand that this is not rocket science by any stretch. And it's just, you know, I mean, it's just basic physics really is all there is to it, and common sense and being a good diagnostician. You know, that's really the secret to this thing is knowing enough to be able to diagnose it and not just jumping from one to the other, you know, and trying to find the quick fix to get you out of the bay, you know. And you know, it's not that. I mean, if you wanted to learn how to do your own air conditioning, it's not that hard. The only problem about doing things manually is you got to be careful with overcharging. Okay, you need to measure by weight the amount of Freon that you put back in that system, because that's the only thing that manual won't do for you. I love manual, but you've got to have a scale. Even if you can't really even use the individual cans because they don't add up to 3.75, and you don't know
On
where
the on the little cans I got from Walmart, it does. I think it's 6 cans is exactly 3.75 pounds.
Yeah. But is 0.5 ounces a half a pound?
No, 8 ounces is. I think they're 6-ounce cans. I
But
did the
you
math.
but you have to be able to, you have to know that.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, just go look up these man on the street interviews where they start just asking random people questions, and it'll terrify you. That people don't know that 16 ounces are a pound, and half of that's 8.
You do know that anybody that shows up and will wear one of those uniforms, they'll hire them to change oil and bust tires and work on your air conditioning. Don't you know that? Okay.
Yeah.
And they'll sit them down in front of a computer and have them take a few little tests, so they can put that diploma on the wall.
Do the absolute least that they can get by with.
And the guy that they had that was the best that's ever walked, they let him go.
Yep.
We got him. So.
Well, well, you were talking about the O-rings, right? So it amazes me how many times that I've had it, and this was even back when Carl was at TA. We'd go to work on a thing. Well, you're going to have to go get some O-rings. I'm like, how the hell do y'all not have? When Carl went on his own, he bought this massive box, But the number of times that I have to go running around looking for, because of course I'm going to do it. There's no way I'm going to try to pay them $125 an hour to go to the parts store. But to go find these O-rings, and I think I bought a pack of them for $10. How do you not have that in your shop? How is that possible? Chris says I'm gonna have my guys watch this podcast. You give out diplomas. Yeah, we'll make them one.
Well, I got another couple of beefs to get off my chest. Can I do that?
Oh, please do.
I am so tired of seeing these truck accidents that people call accidents. Okay. If you're a professional driver and you are tailgating another truck or a car, especially a car, okay, and you wreck, that's not an accident. That's first of all, it's premeditated murder is what it is. You ought to go to jail for life, and when it's snowing and raining and you still do it and you don't increase your following distance based on conditions, you're still a moron. Okay.
That's that cranial rectal version we were talking about.
Why do we have professional drivers that can't drive next to each other without wrecking? Why can't two trucks be on the same interstate and not run into each other? I just can't figure that out. And then, and running red lights. I know you're mad at the government for having red lights, but that's not who you're going to kill. You're going to kill my family, because we're going to assume that the green light means go. We're not going to assume that the moron coming down the hill in an 80,000-pound vehicle is going to run the light, just because he's pissed at the world and kill, innocent people. So do me a favor. If you're going to be that way, go find something else to do, quit ruining this industry for being a moron.
Well, I've got one. 501c3s are in some cases, I believe, a surefire money-making scheme. And we were having a conversation today, and a couple of these trucking charities came up. And so I went and looked up, there's a website called GuideStar, and you can go look at the Form 990 that they file with the government every year. And so I looked up 2 different trucking charities, and both of them in 2020 or 21, I can't remember what was the newest one. Both of them brought in $1.7 million in grant donations, grants, so on and so forth. One of them,
well-known charities.
well known,
In
you
the trucking,
you know the name of them.
you would
right?
know both of them. Yeah, yeah.
And one of them spent $173,000 of the $1.7 million on salaries and benefits and this, that, and the other.
Administrative cost.
Yeah, salaries, basically. The other one spent almost $1 million of the 1.7 million on salaries.
Yeah, watch out who you donate to.
Yeah, because I just won't get lured into, oh, would you like to donate to such and such? Well, no, not here at the Arby's counter. I don't have the time to go, Google and look up their 990 and see if they're actually doing charity work or not. There's too many of these that have turned into scams, and there's one in trucking that's a huge one. It's a huge scam,
and it is a real hot button. It's a feel good thing. Okay.
Yeah. But just go on your own. The GuideStar account's free. Go look up all the trucking charities. You'll find it pretty quick. You'll find all the big name ones, and you'll find the one that's run by the biggest bunch of crooks. But there's a book called Thou Shalt Prosper by this Jewish rabbi. And one of the things that he talks about in this book is that your dollars are your certificates of appreciation, and that business is charity. Or in not really charity, business is moral when it's done correctly. Because you're supporting, look at all the families that we support through Blue Ribbon, all the truck owners, all of the drivers, me, and what we're doing here, it generates benefits for people. And you don't have to be a 501c3 to actually be doing good work. There's a bunch of 501s that are doing great work, fantastic work, but you probably never heard of most of them. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, advertising budgets for charities are not cheap, and they don't give those ads away because you're a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
So we probably should we probably should do a little business here, okay?
Yeah.
Probably should talk about this a little bit. We really can't talk about driver opportunities much right now because I don't think we've got one. I think we're full. But we certainly can help other people that have trucks, and if you're struggling with fuel costs and business and whatnot, struggling with the pressures of rates falling and fuel prices going up, we'll be glad to work with you, help you out, show you what we do.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to teach you how to, work on your cost per mile. Probably talk to you about making some bad, some difficult decisions. But you may be in a position right now where you have the choice to make them. You wait long enough, you won't have the choice. It'll be made for you. And still time to pull back and avoid the hill in front of you, but it's time to get on it. So
I was at a youth sports event the other night and talking to a doctor friend of mine, and he goes, "Boy, I bet this fuel's really messing y'all up." And I'm like, "No, not really." Mm-hmm. And he just looked at me. He's like, "What?" And I said, "Fuel surcharge is paying for the fuel." I said, "When we get good fuel miles, we make money on the fuel." And he went, "Oh." I said, "Well, the rates are down. It's challenging, but we have a low cost of operation, and so we're going to be fine." And he was like, "Wow." Just the look on his face when I said that was priceless.
People that I haven't seen in a long time, that's the first thing to bring up. Well, I bet that trucking business sucks right now, doesn't it? Yeah, well, it does for some people.
Yeah. So I'm looking at the calendar, and we are on Monday night next week because the Sunday is the annual recognition of the nuptials of one Larry W. Long and Mary Lou. So I figure he would rather spend that evening with her rather than y'all. So
46 years of marriage and 52 years of being together. So
congratulations. So can't believe she's put up with you for that long.
No shit.
So yeah, we're on Monday night next week, and then Sunday the following, and then we'll have you another Saturday night meeting because we'll be having an orientation in West Virginia.
Yeah.
So
if you guys are going to be coming through West Virginia on the weekend of August 26th, 27th, we'll be at the Wingate by Wyndham doing driver orientation. We've got a couple of new folks coming on. So if you want to stop in, yell at us, and have a drink at the Blue Ribbon Bar, please do. And sit in on a little of our orientation if you want to. We'll talk to you about mentoring if you want to. Or we'll just talk about whatever you want to. So we will be Saturday night, 9 o'clock live there. Hey, my favorite sporting event of the whole year starts next week, and that's the Little League World Series. So all the Little Leaguers, 8 to 12-year-olds, they're all playing their regional championships right now, and they'll all be going to Williamsport next weekend. And it's truly the purest sporting event that there is. I mean, the kids play for the love of the game. Everybody's a volunteer. Nobody makes any money. It's a beautiful thing. Sportsmanship is incredible, and it's just it's the only sporting event I'll watch all year outside of the Kentucky Wildcats. So.
All righty. Well, we will see y'all next Monday night at 9 p.m. Until then, everyone be cool, be safe. We'll see you next time.
Work on your own air conditioners, okay?
Yeah.
Guys, have a good week.
We'll get you a diploma in the mail.